Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians and counting for nearly 50 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today. It's the wonderful Mr. Ben Pope.
Yeah. Hello. Hello. This is very exciting.
Hello. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Rich. Thanks so much for having me. This is I'm honored to be considered one of the 1,000. That's amazing.
My pleasure, my friend. You're a very funny comedian. I'm delighted to have you as a guest.
That's very kind. Yeah, thank you.
The interview is going to last about 45 minutes to an hour. It's going to be all about your comedy career.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to start off and ask you, how did you become a comedian in the first place, please?
Well, I guess when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with comedy. I think I remember coming home from school and they were showing a Bill Bailey special on Channel 4. And I couldn't. It was just you could feel it click, something broke in my brain, or it released some kind of hormone or something, and I was just like, it's smart and it's funny and it's multivarious and amazing, and I was just I have to at least like study this almost, so I just started like I watched anything I could get my hands on. It was that period where you could go to like HMV or something and just go to all the DVDs and it was sort of like, doing all your research, you'd write down all the names and I'd go and watch them on YouTube and see if I liked them. And obviously about that same time I was like started writing little jokes and stuff in notebooks. But obviously if you're 14, no one wants to hear your dreadful jokes. And I was never going to do. Well, this is it. I think it was a good. What it was great is like I did like maybe like 3 or 4 years of writing down stuff, and until I went to university, and then I started doing stand up, and it was quite a good thing to have got a lot of stuff out of my system and put it down on paper, so that when I started, I had at least some jokes that I thought might work rather than just ramblings. And then I started doing stand up at a university, and there was a sort of good comedy society. And so I just started doing sketch stuff and stand up, and I was doing a little bit of theater anyway. And then once I graduated, I just continued doing. I sort of, by then it had become like the dream. It was the thing I wanted to do. And I moved to London, and I've been doing it ever since.
Where was university?
So I was at Cambridge, and I did all of the sort of footlights stuff. So I was involved in.
So a good grounding, very good grounding for you.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think since then it's been kind of. I think a lot of people often there's often a lot. It does put a lot of people's backs out, given that it's Cambridge, and there's a lot of like, there's a lot of privilege associated with it, and there are definitely an astonishing number of people who've come out of there. And so it does sort of, I think, understandably, for the same reason that any kind of kind of privileged institution, I think there's a little bit of kickback against it, but. The reason I found it like amazing was just because you get that opportunity at a young age to literally, there's like a show every fortnight, or if you really wanted to do, there's a show every week. Wow. And so we just got to like just practice stuff in front of an audience, and you get to like work out some kinks and get a bit of confidence, so that when you then go, to the actual real world and start doing stuff, open mic gigs, you have a bit of kind of a buffer of like, I'm not necessarily I know what I'm doing, but I have the kind of like inflated confidence of someone who thinks that they do, that will get you through the kind of really grim.
We've all been there.
Well, this is it, The idea, I have like an absolutely insane amount of admiration for anyone who starts comedy, particularly at a young age, in like the bottom of pubs in open mic with like a cruel crowd of like other comedians and almost no one else, because it's such a hostile environment for comedy, and to actually like get out of that and to like to get good out of that is it's like you've got to be an absolute, I don't know, just like you've got to be like a cockroach in the apocalypse. It's like that, just kind of like keep coming back.
So you're at university. What sort of year is this?
This is 2011, 12, 13, 14. 12,
yeah, right. That sort of. So you have am I right in saying you have your first ever gig at university?
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Bizarre. It was in like, and this was like always the way. There were a lot of very weird gigs because there's lots of like student gigs, and some of them are like in a theater or in like kind of like music space or something like that, and those makes sense, in the same way that if you go to a gig in a music venue or you go to a gig in a theater now. But there was also like people would just wanted to put stuff on, and there's all these like lecture theaters, so we do gigs in lecture theaters that are like the most clinical environment ever. Enormous high ceilings, the lighting is like so interrogation bright. And so that was when I did my first gig. I did in like in a sort of seminar room in one of the colleges, and it was, I think, quite a bad show. It was quite.
I can't imagine that.
It just had a kind of, I don't know. I did okay enough. I think. I'm sure if I watched it, if there was any recording of it or any audio of it, I would be like, this is the most embarrassing ever. But at the time, there was like enough of a glimmer of like, this went okay, this went pretty well.
Was it a packed room?
No, oh my goodness, no. Just like if you like, maybe like 30 people in probably like a 120 seat.
30 more than not.
Well, this is it, exactly. Yes. And that when you get better, that becomes a thing of just like, well, 30 is great, I can deal with it. You do the Fringe and you're like, if I've done a gig to 4 people or to 2 people, or it's 30 is a treat.
It's interesting because my home city's Carlisle. And I've spent half my life in London, but I went to college in Stoke and I did business. There's lots of lecture theatres there. The way you described, they're very big unless they've got people in them. And you've got my utmost admiration for getting up and having a go. I did want to have a go at stand-up comedy myself to get it out in the system. I've told loads of comedians this story. It's priceless. I knew a promoter years ago, and I said, I'd like to get it out in the system. He said, I've got a gong show for old people. Couldn't be worse. And it was on a Tuesday. It was on a Tuesday evening. There was 3 in there, and I had 3 minutes to entertain them. So I walked out, and the first thing I said to them was, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself. And of course, I'm his double. I certainly was at college." And one old bloke at the back just yelled, "Fuck off!" And I walked up to my footsteps, and the promoter went, "Have another go." I said, "No." I said, "I think my vocation is in the crowd to get all the support." But never say never again, So you've got my utmost admiration for getting up and having a go,
So you've got to start somewhere.
I mean, if you knew exactly what you were going to do, and you were determined, what's not to love about it, So
you've got to start it somewhere, and you've also, I think I would have absolutely, I would kick myself if I'd never tried. That exactly. Time as well. There's no, that period of your life, you just got to
with your background, did you ever find it difficult at all to break through into comedy? Was there any venues that you wanted to play that were difficult to get into, or how did you go about when you got to London? Because you said, did you do 5-minute spots in pubs eventually and things like this to build the memento up?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I think, however, whatever kind of like, even if you've done like comedy courses, or if you've done, however you start, I think you are always going to have to go and do open mic spot. You're always going to have to do, unless you're literally I don't know, maybe now it's different with like all this sort of people who have like an enormous online following from doing, they start with doing like sketches online and that builds, and then they come to stand up. Maybe with that, maybe you can kind of skip a few rungs, but certainly if you start with any kind of live stuff, you've got to go down and do the dirty work,
Yeah. Well, I say to a lot of the comedians, my guess is it's all experience. The more you do, the better you're a comedian you are. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's every time that I think I'm beginning to like plateau, or to like get a bit, not necessarily bored, but just like maybe frustrated with doing the same thing again. There's like a point where you just push over the horizon a little bit, and either do a gig you wouldn't normally do, or just, I don't know, put some time aside to write some more stuff, or you go back and find old bits, or whatever it is. There's always like, if you just push that a little bit further along, something cracks open and there's like a new, there's a new room to find. There's always like more doors, there's more chambers in it to find.
Yeah.
And that just comes from doing it over and over again. Like, as I said, like, just like, but moving forward with it, I think it's very easy to get complacent and then stop, or to like take a break or whatever. But actually, I think it is one of those things where just with not necessarily repetition, but just like keeping putting an effort into it, keeping pushing forward, you do just find things. You find stuff about. I had quite a good the last couple of years. I really think, like, just from getting out there and making sure I book myself into gigs and going there, I've just found a little bit more comfort on stage. So, like, for instance, when you first saw me, Richard, I was doing MCing, and I would not have been able to do that 2 or 3 years ago. To that level of comfort, and certainly not always be, because it just something is like just cracked a little bit, and I don't know what it is. I know how to be a bit more comfortable and a bit more myself on stage, and then that suddenly means that you can be much funnier because you're just being natural and you're being organic.
Yeah. That's fantastic, and it's so interesting. You mentioned that you have to do the 5-10 minute slots because. A major part of this blog is not just supporting the bigger comics, it's supporting the up and coming comics. And I've been for years going to these free comedy nights in the pub rooms, supporting so many comedians. And of course, the laugh they absolutely love. And the laugh generated, I first realized I had it when I went to see 70s comedian Tom O'Connor on holiday with the family in Scarborough. And I didn't know, I was about 8, 9, and he walked out and he did his patter. And I burst out laughing to him, and it floored him. He had to leave the stage and then come back on again. And I thought, I've got something here. My God.
That's fantastic.
So, thank you, Tom.
I don't think I've ever seen any of Tom O'Connor's thing. I think I've only heard about, I think Stuart Lee mentions him in the routine at one point. That's how I know Tom O'Connor. All right, okay, yeah.
I mean, amiable enough, Liverpool comic, but, typical 70s.
Yeah, right.
Completely different time.
Yeah.
So when you're on stage and you're doing a routine, what do you like to talk about? Do you have any specific themes or
things that I really like? I don't tend to have like themes as such, but I definitely come back to a lot of, well, the things I really enjoy getting into tend to be like stories. I really enjoy sharing things from that have happened to me. I find it a lot more difficult to like write abstract bits or like political stuff or things about I think I can do observational things, but like writing really extended observational routines is like, oh, that's a real skill, and I'm trying to get better at that. But yeah, the thing I always find the most comfortable is when I'm like telling someone an anecdote. I always like that feeling of like, oh, guys, I'm going to share this thing with you. That's always really fun. And then it also means that when you're writing a bit as well, and when you're performing it, there's a bit of like scaffolding. There's a bit of like structure inbuilt into the bit because you've got a story with a beginning.
Yeah.
You want to relate something and you want to get to that endpoint. So then you hang all those little sort of tangents off it, but it's very fun to just build the thing. So that's where I sort of find myself. And they also do tend to be stories about my being inept or stupid or mucking something up. Oh, I just
lost you.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. Sorry. You're back. Sorry about that.
I don't know what happened.
We still hear you. Do carry on.
Okay. But yeah, do they tend to be like things that I've done wrong or things that I've mucked up, or it tends to be like I'm very much like an underdog character on stage. It's always like I've put my foot in it, or I've got mugged, or I used to have
people always support the underdog, always.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's partly that, and I also like I find it very like what it allows me to do then is like I establish myself as like quite a kind of sort of I don't know, like weaker character. It means then when I do arrogant stuff on stage, it's so obviously it's I don't know, there's like an inbuilt humor to it because it's absurd that I would be an arrogant person. There's like no reason for me to be and it just means it's also like a bit more like playful and a bit more like charming rather than being.
That's brilliant. And following on from that, how do you remember all your routines? Do you have a way of remembering them?
That's a really good question. I don't. Well, partly, I guess the hope always is that because I've written it and it's come from my brain to begin with, and particularly again with stories where it's happened to you. And it's often, if I'm telling a story on stage, there's something that's happened to me, I've probably told it, I've like realized it will be a good bit because in real life, someone's asked me how I am or what's going on in my life. And I've been talking to a friend in the pub or whatever. And then I've been like, oh, you'll never guess this thing. And then as I'm telling it, I'm like, oh, actually, maybe there's something in that to do on stage. And so then it just becomes a case of just like, I've sort of begun workshopping it in real life, and then so it's not too difficult to remember. But I do also, this is something I always forget to do, or I get a bit lazy with sometimes, is like rehearsing stuff and actually like going through it with my notes before a gig is so important, particularly if you're doing like a longer show, if you're doing like an hour-long show, it's so important to actually you're doing a job, you're doing a performance, you need to like rehearse it and as if it is lines, because it's very easy, particularly in like pub bar gigs where you're there, it's all a bit knockabout, you've got a pint of something, it's very easy to just pretend and that everything is just, it's just coming off the top of my head and I'll remember what I get on stage. And then you miss like vital little bits, so you forget lines and maybe you've got the whole gist of the thing across, but it's like the precision work that really like elevates someone from like good to great, I think comes from just being a bit more doing the work, doing the rehearsal, doing the sitting with it and just like running the lines a little bit.
Totally agree. It reminds me the most creative thing I've ever done apart from this blog was I wrote a play called The Applicant, which me and my mate put on for Comic Relief. I originally wrote it for the Edinburgh Fringe, but we made a lot of money for Comic Relief for it, and it's basically about me coming down from Carlisle. I've got a successful girlfriend in London, and I've never had a job. So they're all interviews. So it starts off, I've never had an interview in my life. So I'm terrified in the waiting room, looking at the audience, telling them the story, and then the interviewer comes on. And the interviews build until I get given my ideal job. And when I get given my ideal job, the interviewer kills me. It's a comedy.
Oh wow! Okay.
So he's never going to get the job.
Such a shock. I was expecting that.
And the last scene is me at the gates of heaven or hell being interviewed by God. And God says to me, we've been watching you on planet Earth and we think you'd be ideal interviewing corpses. And I shrugged my shoulders and that's it. This went through the roof. However, having written it and having rehearsed it for about 10 weeks, the first night I ran out and I had to do this great long monologue and I forgot the lines. I was like a rabbit in headlights. And I'd rehearsed, rehearsed, and it was just, I want to go home. This is it. I've had enough. But as soon as my friend came on, we could banter, and he brought it back. And I never made a mistake again. But it was so interesting because is it like that with comedy, or can you? Presumably, you can chat with the audience, and that'll bring it back to where you want it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that really attracted me to doing comedy in the first place is that like there's always room for error and there's room for things to go wrong, and that to be actually a virtue or interesting part of it. I used to do when I was a kid. I used to do loads of like choral music and orchestral stuff, and I was like a classically trained musician, and I always felt like I never wanted to do it as a career because there's a level of perfection with music where it's like if you get something wrong, irrespective of how well the rest of it goes, it will still have been an imperfect performance. Like it won't have been. And I found all that really like the tension of that and trying to be as good as, but it was always like so it's really stressful and not very enjoyable, and it made performance very kind of much more scary and uncomfortable than it should have been. Whereas with comedy and acting to a certain extent, but mostly comedy, is like there's a sort of inbuilt sort of sense that what's happening is live, and that's the virtue of it, and that's why it's exciting. And so I've always enjoyed that. You know, if something does go wrong, exactly as you say, like you can talk to the audience about it. You can just, completely chuck that bit of material and move on to another bit. There's always
room for scope of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And and it doesn't matter if you get to the end of something, if you were funny as a rule, then people will forgive the bits that didn't work as much. And again, obviously, as with all these things, the great comedians are precise, and they do, they are like classical musicians, and they do play it like that. So, you never want to rely on the fact that it can go wrong. That'd be like, it'll be fine. But also, exactly. That is why it's, I don't know. There's that element of it. I kind of. Do
you ever fancy bringing the music into the act? I'm thinking Lloyd Griffith used to be a choir boy, and he sings in his act. Do you ever and gets a round of applause every time?
This is it.
No is the answer.
I find it very like when I first started getting into comedy, I was very excited about it. I did trying to write like comedy songs or whatever, and I was never quite good enough at music, or at least like the music I wanted to write. I could just never quite make it fit the funny lyrics or whatever. I found it very, and again, like the stressful element of performing music then made me scared about the comedy, when actually I liked comedy as it was. I liked that it had the kind of, it wasn't stressful. It was like a fun thing rather than a kind of terrifying thing. So, I mean, yeah, my friend Chris MacArthur Boyd is always trying to convince me to sing. He keeps bullying me and saying, "You've got to sing in your act."
Well, I could easily imagine you with a guitar and in a comedy. Typical of comedian like Boothby Graffoe or Vicky Stone or Huge Davis, somebody like that, and the guitar's your prop, so you can always go to that,
Yeah.
it's another way of keeping going, if you like, the scope.
It would be
Just
so
an
nice.
idea.
No, I know, I know. I wish I played the guitar. This was
All
another
right.
problem was that I didn't play any of the cool instruments. I
No,
played the
no,
French
no.
horn and like,
Oh well,
that's
yeah,
not,
yeah, yeah,
that's not
yeah.
very portable, is it?
So earlier on, you mentioned about comedy competitions.
Uh,
Have you done many comedy competitions, and what is your view of them? Do you think they're a good thing?
I did a fair few when I was coming up a bit more. So, I did So You Think You're Funny, and I definitely did like heats for the Leicester Square one and the Amused Moose. I think
Yeah,
I
yeah.
um, uh, and for me, it was always I think what I managed to do, and I was very lucky to do it, but I got through to the final of the So You Think You're Funny one, and I think I
Well
won
done.
the Piccadilly one, which we used to I don't think runs anymore, but it was like yeah, it was like I don't know when that was 2016, 2017 or something like that. And after that, I was like, great, let's rule a line under this now because I've done well enough to be like, okay, I can put a little quote on a poster or whatever, but also they are quite existentially challenging
Yes,
things,
I can imagine.
you
Yes,
know.
yeah,
And so it was quite nice to be like, and now my competition era of my thing is done. I'm like too old and I've been going slightly too long to be like mucking about with it. And that was quite a kind of healthy thing, I think, because I think a lot of, and I imagine it's worse now because like, there's so much competition. There's so much like, there's so
yeah.
many people
So many.
doing it and so many
Yeah,
young people who are like excited about it, but who need kind of like some kind of currency with which to get forward in their career. And so there's always that kind of there must be a lot. I know a lot of people who, in the same way with like the Fringe or whatever, where people are like, well, I'll go up this year and I'll do like a half an hour and then I'll do a 45. And then they're like next 6 years planned out. And, for me, that's just always like freaks me out because I'm just like, I want to be able to react to what's going on in my life. And that be
exactly.
what the comedy is
Yeah.
rather than be sort of tied into these like little landmarks that everyone is deciding upon. So I think I don't know. They're fine. They serve a purpose. I was very lucky with the ones that I did do, but yeah, I wouldn't set too much store by it.
That's interesting because when I first had the idea for the blog, and there was a comment on the blog that I wrote, and I was invited to a half-day writing course to do with comedy. So I went along, and everybody around me wanted to be a reviewer. And yeah, exactly. And the woman came to me and said, "We forget why you're here. Can you remind us why you're here?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a reviewer. I'm not a critique. I'm a member of the audience out to have a good time." And they never bothered me again because it was so positive and so uplifting. And that's why the blog exists, because what's not to love. Yes. But all these reviewers around me were like, "Oh, well, should I do that?" And they're really laid into them. They were like, "This is what you have to do." And they were treating it more like a business, which is not why I do it. I go and I have a great time. And I thought my enthusiasm when I'm in the audience, as well as the blog, shines through, and clearly it's working because it's the blog is going through the roof, and I will, as long as it is brilliant, and as long as I can move, I will go to a gig. As long as I'm and as long as the laugh's intact.
What a mantra! Yeah, my goodness, I love that.
When you go on stage, do you suffer any nerves before you go on stage? And if so, how do you cope with them?
I do. It depends. Well, it depends what it is, what kind of gig it is. I think if it's something very important. All gigs are important in their own way. But if there's something where I know I have to impress someone or whatever, that really does tend to get to me. In a way, I think sometimes that that I didn't think it used to. I think I used to be a lot more blasé about it, but somehow I think as I've gone along, sometimes that sort of thing, if I'll suddenly, particularly, I don't know, if I'm tired, I'll suddenly be like, oh, that I don't have the energy to sort of like fight this. I'm gonna,
I can't be bothered with this.
yeah, it's just quite exactly. It's sort of, it's gonna kind of get to me. But for the most part, the way I describe it to most people when people ask about it is like, because usually when you meet new people, they're always like, it's often one of their first questions. It's like, God, it make me so nervous to do it. How do you deal with that? And obviously, when you start out right at the beginning, it does kind of ruin the whole day because you're like worrying about it all day, and then you do it.
Is that it?
Now I think I've squeezed it down to like maybe 10 seconds before I go on, where suddenly you're like, oh, there's a room full of people and I've got to do this now. And actually, that's kind of perfect because it just as before you go on, it kicks you into gear. And you run through in your head what you're going to say, what you're going to open with, how are you going to what's your tactic, your stance going to be to get this particular room going. And then
that's interesting that it's just before, because another question is, would you agree that as soon as you walk across the stage to the microphone and speak into the microphone, the nerves disappear?
I think not quite then. I think I definitely feel comfortable once I've got the mic, because I'm now like, this is my weapons, this is my gear, you know? Yeah, exactly. But it's not until the first laugh that because just particularly if I'm doing a set, I'm mostly pretty comfortable because I know that there's a safety net of like, if I absolutely bomb the hell out of this, there'll be someone to come and mop it up, you know. And also you're coasting on a momentum that someone else has created. So there's that. But if I'm emceeing, that first, like, kind of the few words, the first, like, you know, and actually I was worried about it the last time that you saw me at Always Be, actually, because I came on and someone who was late and they cut right across the stage, literally just as I got on stage to say hello. And I reacted to it. And I went straight into a little bit of like material that I have when you do when people are late for stuff. But actually, it's quite weird to come out and just hit people with like jokes straight away rather than doing the hi, hello, and all this stuff. So there was a second there where I was like, oh no, I've gone on autopilot and I've actually fucked the beginning of the game. Excuse my French. I was really worried, and then of course once you sort of break it and you go like, okay, here we go, here's all that, then it's fine. But until you've got that first laugh, it is quite. There is the worry that they just won't come, and then if you the further along you get, the more terrifying it is because you're like, this might never come, and then what will we do? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then people start to lose confidence.
Yeah.
And then it's just you're on a hiding to nowhere. It's terrifying.
James Gill from Always Be Comedy once said to me, you know, if you do not come along to the gigs, the acts will want to know why, because your laugh is so. That's too much pressure. It is amazing. It's like, you know, I've been in many a gig where there is no laughter and you're willing the comedian just to go up slightly or to develop his material just a wee bit more, or her material or whatever. It's a fascinating thing, but certainly I think once you're away with your routine or your comparing, there must be a point where you think, this is going well. This is going to be a good night. You know.
Yeah, I think so. You hit like a kind of critical mass where you're like, okay, and now people like me. Like there's like people can laugh, and then I think there's like laugh, and then there's a point where they're like, oh, I really trust this guy to make us laugh. And then that's the really fun bit, because then then you're sort of like free to do what you want.
Was there ever a point in your career, there must have been, where you thought, I can do this and I can do this well?
Honestly, I think only fairly recently have I been like sure that I'm good at it. That's a quite a scary thing to
That's
say.
fine. It's
And
fine.
even now, as I'm saying it, I'm like, that's gonna come back and bite me in the ass. The next gig, I'm absolutely it's gonna go right through the floor. But
Well,
yeah, I
please
think
keep doing it. Please keep doing it.
I'll take that advice. I think, yeah.
Let's move on. I am very lucky to be able to go to the Edinburgh Fringe, Edinburgh Festival every year. I've been going since 2005.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's my holiday. I see about 50 shows in the week that I'm there. I do a spreadsheet like all the acts I've ever seen. Get loads of friends up there from all over Britain. We have the best week, and by the end of it, I need a holiday. So it's so good. There is something very magical, and I'm developing more fringes as well. I go to Leicester and I go to Brighton. And I go to Hastings, and it's wonderful. Can you tell me about your first Edinburgh Fringe in particular? Did you go up there as a punter? Were you an act? Were you part of a bill? What year was it?
The first one I actually went to was I was an audience member. Yeah, I went up for like a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, with my parents, and I was still a student, and I really wanted to go. And I think we were maybe going to do a little Scottish holiday anyway as a family. And so I was like, please, can we just stop off during the Fringe? I really want to see all these acts. And it was like, I was completely overwhelmed by it because it was like all these acts that I really wanted to see.
Yeah.
And I'd been reading about, and I'd like, watched whatever little bit of YouTube stuff they had on. And then you're seeing like them walk down the street and it was so amazing. I couldn't believe it. So I was just going to everything we could go to, and you just there was just like a sheer joy. It was like because I love music, but I very rarely go to live music gigs. Even though I should go to more. But that feeling of like, so I never really had that. I was never like going to like festivals or whatever as a teenager, or like going to Glastonbury or whatever. So for me, it was just like the idea of, this thing I'd been like being such a nerd about for about 5 years, and suddenly like all
We're not nerds.
You know what I mean? That kind of like almost academic focus that you have when you're like really into it, and there was suddenly there they were. It was like seeing all these people that were famous to me everywhere.
It is extraordinary. It really is. It's like, for me, I step off the train at Waverley, and the atmosphere is at the railway station before you go, and it's you walk into this like, well, what are we going to do? Who are we going to see? I've missed two, obviously because of the pandemic, 2020 and 2021, but I went in August. And I had just the best time for the first time ever because of the blog and the podcast. The comedians were coming up to me, like I normally can I have a photograph, please? It's like, and they're like, oh my God, it's Richard Gill. I'm like, oh, yeah. No, I have is the laugh.
I love that.
It's extraordinary. It really is. So, thank you everybody for making it. So, did you? What was your first live Fringe when you performed?
So the year after that, when I was still a student, and I went up with a couple of like student shows. So I was doing like a kids show. We were doing like a Roald Dahl thing for kids in the morning, and then I was doing a sketch show at sort of 3 p.m. And then I was also doing a like stand-up mixed bill. I was like organizing and comparing a stand-up mixed bill. So it was like a really busy day because it was, we'd have to get up for 10:30 and then flyer until the sketch show, and then flyer until the stand-up show. And that was a 6. And then you'd be exhausted. You'd go out and get drunk and then start again the next morning.
Liver is battered.
Just endlessly over and over again. So it was real sensory overload, but it was really incredible because it was having had that experience the year before, I was like, oh my goodness, this thing, all these people here, and then to be doing it so like intensively as well, where you're,
I was just going to say it's 25 nights with about 3 days off. That's full on.
It really is. And I was talking to Jacob Hawley about this.
Yeah, he's been on here. Yeah, lovely bloke. Yeah.
And we were saying how insane it is that, like, unless you're on like the West End or you're like a regional thing, no one's doing 25. That's a theatrical run. Why? Why would you? It's absolutely. It's absurd to be doing that at like our level, where you're like, a working, I've not done tons of TV or anything. I've not done all this stuff, but you're still like putting yourself through like a
well, it's all promotion and recognition, isn't it? And that's why folk keep going back.
This is it.
Yeah, I as I said, I had a great time in 2022, and I had a message halfway through the week. This is quite a funny story from Ivor Graham, who hardly ever messages me, but he said, are you in Edinburgh? I said, yeah. He said, I hope we can meet in the Pleasance Courtyard. And I said, well, have you seen my itinerary? There's loads of gigs. I saw him just before I left in the courtyard, and he went, I'm so pleased. And he handed me, that I've got a T-shirt that said Richard Says Laugh on it. He got me that, right? It's an infamous T-shirt. And he played Always Be Comedy the week back from the Fringe. And I sat there, and the T-shirt and his entire set was how he got my T-shirt for me. So wherever I wear it, I always send him a message. I'm with traveling along this T-shirt.
That's sensational.
It's just wonderful, isn't it? And it's little gems like that make it magical. There are so many old friends I've seen over the years there who go along with me. There's so many acts I've seen develop. I saw Michael McIntyre in a hut there, play about 30 people. Just amazing. That's just an example of Sarah Millican, started at Alan Carr. Just amazing, and look how big they are now. So the Edinburgh experience obviously does help enormously, and the Fringes and everything, to have them back is just a wonderful thing. So are you going to go in 2023?
I'm working it out. I'm not entirely sure, just because I have a show that I would be quite excited to take up, but I'm not sure if I can do a whole month for various like personal reasons and stuff. But I think it would be nice to. I will definitely go up at some point, if it's to do a show or just to see some stuff. I will be.
I'll see you there, and we'll have a drink, whether you're a punter or doing a show.
That's a deal.
Definitely. As I said at the start, I recently saw you compare brilliantly Always Be Comedy. You were a guest compare. I saw you do it twice. The last time we went, I've got a brand new job in Wandsworth Council. I live in Southfields, Wandsworth. And work came along who had never been to a comedy show before and complimented you highly on your audience work. So you probably never see these people, but they loved you.
I hugely appreciate it. That's the best kind of compliment.
Do you think comparing a comedy night is different to performing a set routine?
Very different. There's a real I think there's a when you're doing a set, you can obviously like Ivor was doing with your T-shirt, you can go way off any kind of script, and that's amazing. He's particularly amazing at that.
Oh, he's brilliant. He's so good.
He's one of those people I watch and I'm like, I can never do that.
To watch him, he's a classic one who's gotten so much better over the years. He really that Game of Life show he did in 2019 was just incredible, and the last one we just saw in Soho. Anyway, you were saying, sorry.
I think there, you can do that, but I think there's always the kind of you've always got the fallback of the fact that you've got a scripted thing that you could say. You've got jokes. You've got or at least this is the way I treat it. You've got a 10-minute chunk or a 15-minute chunk or whatever it is. You sort of know roughly what you're going to hit people with. Yeah. Whereas with emceeing, and I mean, it depends how you MC, but for me, again, I like to talk to people. I like to try and get something fresh out of things. It's fun, but it also like means I don't have to, I'm not going to worry about if I prepare something and then it's the wrong thing. And there's not like, it doesn't feel right in the room, whereas if you're just sort of talking to people that's there, you're always going to get something fresh. You're always going to get something that's appropriate to them as well, because they're giving you the stimuli to make it work. Also, I don't know, it's more nerve-wracking, I think, emceeing, because there's a bit more of the show that rests on your shoulders. I know, to be honest, at Aldersby, I don't feel too worried about it because the acts are so good. So like, people have heard of them and they're like really like, big names and stuff. So you always feel like, well, even if I'm rubbish, they've got serious artillery. So that's fine. But yeah, I find it much more nerve-wracking because it's just so much looser. You're like really just opening yourself up to the gods, it's just full chance. Anything could happen, and you've just got to roll with it.
What's interesting with you that we all thought was that yes, there was the audience banter, but you developed it into routines. You were in the second half and the third half, particularly. It was you were doing bits and pieces, and you could see there's a lot more than just chatting to the audience with you, and that was wonderful to see.
Well, that's something, I've been thinking about a lot. It's like I've been doing a lot more MCing work. I'm trying to work out what the best way to do, it's always good, I think, opening where you're talking to people. Yeah. It's always nice to bring those like elements back later in the show and to like see if you can develop, a little relationship where you've got all these characters in the audience. But then also, I was particularly at the beginning of the like last section, it's quite hard once people have had a drink and once people have sort of got the gist of the show, it's quite hard to like go in fresh and meet a new person. So I'm always like, let's see if can I find a way to worm in some like routine stuff so that I'm hitting them with a bit of like stuff I know works. So so that was quite a fun one to do.
Do you have any ambitions as a comedian? Would you like to do more MCing? Would you like to be on TV? Would you like to be on a quiz show or have your own chat show or anything like
that? I think if you'd asked me that question about 2 or 3 years ago, I would have had some really clear answers for you, Rich. But I think in the last it's just the pandemic. I'm just so excited to be. Gigs are still just. I know it's ages since we've been back and everything, but like, I'm so the novelty of being able to do it, and also like, I feel like I have like progressed quite a lot in my own skill over the last couple of years. So it's been really nice to just like, gigs like Alwaysby, or like there's other places all over the place that I've just started to be able to build a relationship with, and it's just really exciting to be doing live stuff.
Exactly.
I'd love to. I just recently just made like a recording. I did like a kind of YouTube special thing that I put out today, actually. And that was fun to do. I'd be interested to like build more stand-up shows that I can put out a bit more widely, whether that's, on some kind of streaming service, or put it out for free, or making albums, or just like making whole complete things that I can give to people. That's really interests me. But I think the kind of TV quiz show thing is a very like specific trajectory. And I don't know if I'm on it. It's like a hard thing to. And again, there's so much competition. There's so many people doing so much stuff. So I think I'm just at the moment I'm keeping my goals quite small, and that it's like I just want to make things I'm excited about, and whether that's like
That's wonderful. It really is. Just keep going with it. You're doing a great thing. So keep going.
Thank you.
Who are your favorite comedians, past and present? Did you have comedy growing up?
Yeah, I watched a lot. My parents watched a lot of like not necessarily stand up, but like lots of like there were French and Saunders was like always on all the
Yeah,
time. Like we loved them
yeah,
and like you know even like a lot of that like classic sketch stuff. We watched a lot of like um you know obviously Monty Python and that kind of thing, but that was more that came later I think for us. Like I discovered that more as a teenager, but like Bremner Bird and Fortune and like
yeah.
um I've been like not like 9 o'clock news and like all the Blackadder stuff and just like those like quite you know classic things. There was just a lot of like silliness. There was a lot of that. We watched a lot of that. Have I Got News for You? I can remember like watching that with my parents when I must have been about 6 or something and not understanding a single reference or what the hell was going on, or even that it was funny. I don't really remember. I just remember sitting there like watching the shapes and but knowing that you know who Ian Hislop was,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
so weird, isn't it?
Amazing when you
Yeah,
remember them.
this is it. They're very like indelible images. And then when I really got into stand up, when I started watching like to be honest, comedy in general, I really so Bill Bailey was like the first big stand-up that I was like obsessed with because I just thought like the breadth of stuff he does is amazing and it's also smart and interesting. But then my real like my all-time favorite is Dylan Moran.
Oh,
I
superb. What a choice. He's fantastic.
just like there's such a lyrical, interesting, like poetic quality to everything he does, and
Yeah,
he's so good at phrase making. He's so good at like attacking something from a completely different angle. It feels almost like a sermon when he talks and stuff. He's
yeah,
very
yeah,
like
yeah.
he's just like addressing the state of the nation. He's like he's got a real kind of but it's also meandering and just he'll touch on anything and it can be really prosaic and ridiculous and it's like observational comedy but like as if Seamus Heaney did it or something. You
Yeah,
know,
very
it's just
so true. He is so
it's
brilliant.
mm,
He's so brilliant. When he announces a tour, I'm first in the queue. It's so good. My first ever comedy gig, well, I say gig, it was a
mm.
show. I was 7 and we went to Scarborough on holiday and it was Les Dawson
Oh
and he
wow.
was just incredible.
Mm.
And this would be 1974. And then a
Right.
year later, I saw Tommy Cooper.
Oh my
And that
goodness.
was incredible.
Yeah,
And
I
the
bet.
curtains opened. He's lying on a bed. There's nothing on stage. Just lying on a bed, and one woman in the crowd is crying with laughter, and it trickles round, and nothing happens. And
Mm.
after about 5 minutes, when everybody's crying with laughter, he just popped his head up. He went, "What? Somebody come on!" That man was a genius.
Oh,
And of
that
course,
is.
I got the bug. And so
Mm.
I made a note of everything I ever saw. Got a giant spreadsheet. So there was Ken Dodd, there was the two
Mm.
Rockies,
Oh yeah.
um, just on and on and on. And then into the 80s, I was very lucky to see Rick Mail in Carlisle,
Oh
who
wow.
was just amazing.
That's
Ben
crazy.
Elton, we saw Bill Hicks in Manchester. He was a genius. And then came down to London and went nearly every week. I remember my first comedy store bill would be Richard Morton, Phil Jupitus, Linda Smith, God bless her. She was wonderful. And to see all these great acts, it was like, well, this is fantastic, and
Mm.
here I am. I think one of the best ones for me now, I think, is Josh Widdicombe. He never fails to make me laugh. We went to a recording of The Last Leg, and he said hello to me in the audience. It's just like, oh my god! But he knows all that, and
Oh,
just wonderful stuff. And you mentioned, "Have I got news for you?" I used to go to a
mm.
lot of TV recordings, and
Right.
the first time Bruce Forsyth did it, I was in the audience with my friend, and he's looking at the auto cue. He's trying to read auto cue, I am crying at laughing. He turns around and goes, looks at me and he goes, please, this is satire. And clear as a bell, you can hear me laugh. It's just magic moments like that.
Seek that one
out. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing.
Mm.
Following on from that, like me, do you go to lots of comedy gigs as a member of the audience, or did you before you were a comedian?
I definitely went to some things before I was a comedian, but it tended to be like big tour shows that were coming around. You know, my family's all from sort of Sussex, so we were in like rural Sussex. There was not loads of stuff that there weren't like loads of clubs nearby or anything. Yeah. But we did go and see like, I don't know, Dara Ó Briain, and who else did we go and see? We saw like Russell Howard, and like if you go to like Brighton or whatever, there's they always have touring through the Theatre Royal and all that stuff. So there was always like, I went to a couple of those things at the sort of peak when like Mock the Week was like the biggest show, and
so good.
And just exactly. It was it was like, it felt like a really exciting time to see all this stuff. And now still I'll go and see. I'm quite picky about like what I go and see, because obviously you're doing it loads of nights of the week. Yeah. For starters, you're seeing people all the time. You're seeing comedy all the time because you're there watching it. You're watching your friends. You're watching the people around you do the stuff. You're watching your colleagues. I always like to stick around if there's someone who I'm really excited about, who's like headlining or whatever. I would make sure you watch that, because it's just, you're always learning something. But then if there's people who I'm really excited about, and it often tends to be people who I'm like, there's something in their comedy that I think I can like learn from, I will go and make sure I make an effort to go and see them. So again, Dylan Moore and I always go and try and go and see live. There's like Soho is really good for seeing like a chunky, long, like hour of like, I'll go and see stuff at the Soho Theatre quite regularly if I can.
I might see you there.
Oh my god, yeah. So it must be your stomping ground, Rich.
Yeah, I go there quite a bit. Would you say if you're on a bill of acts at a gig, would you stay and watch them all?
It depends. It depends. Like, I mean, again, like it depends who is on and how the gig's going and all this sort of stuff. I do like to, but then also it's when you're doing it. I do this, and I also have a day job, and so doing both, it gets very like, after a while, you're like, okay, I know particularly if I know the people on a bill, I'm like, well, I know what they do and I've seen it before. I'm sure they'll be great, but there's the element of it where it becomes work and not, do you know what I mean? You're like, I'm going to clock off now and I can see it. But also, again, as I say, like sometimes, and often I do this when it's like newer acts who I've not seen before.
Right. It's
really fun watching like newer, often when it's like older, people who are really, you've established. Often I'm like, well, I know what they're going to do roughly. And then, so I might not say for them, but for newer acts, it's quite exciting because you want to see someone who's like, particularly when they're like doing their best 10 to try and like, you're like, oh, I want to know what they're like, if I seen them around or whatever. It's really exciting to see someone come up and actually smash it. And you're like, wow, that person's really come on in the last year or whatever. That's always really
good. Yeah. That's another reason why the blog works, because it's like a list of everything I've seen, so I can remember specific gigs and whatnot, and it's great. How have you found online gigs as opposed to live comedy? Did you do a lot of online gigs? Have you done many of them?
I did a handful over the pandemic. I didn't do loads. I was much more, when the opportunity came to do sort of outdoor stuff or to do things that were like in like safe environments, whatever, I was doing a lot more of that, because I think a lot of the energy that I have is on stage is best experience. I get energy from the crowd, and I like to sort of whip up things. I find it very difficult to do that on Zoom or whatever. I was always surprised. I think I always dreaded doing online gigs. And then when I did it, I actually found it quite fun. It's still, I remember there's still something there. The performer, you still have to perform. You still have to like do the, do the business. There was a point I remember at the beginning of 2021 where we were coming into, it was like March or April, and I did like an online gig for Angel Comedy, and I realized I just hadn't done one maybe in a few months because there hadn't been a lot. It was that quite sad, dark lockdown.
Yeah.
And I've been, focusing on my other work. And I suddenly realized I was like really nervous. I was like absolutely terrified. And it was so ridiculous because I was just in my front room, just like hands on the table, like gnawing at the thing. I was like so worried all of a sudden. The adrenaline of it was just like, it's huge. It was so exciting. So I mean, there is definitely still something there. I would think I would probably struggle to do one now, just because the kind of the adrenaline hit of doing a live gig is so much.
I totally agree. I mean, when they first started with me, I used to go to Happy Mondays with Sean James on a Monday. I used to go to Open Comedy on a Wednesday, and Jarlath Regan's Irishman Abroad on a Friday.
Yeah.
And when they were done well, they were done very well. But when it all first started, few of them that I went to, there was no audio. So I would sit here laughing at four walls, and they couldn't hear me. I thought I was going to be taken away. But once the audio happened, the comedians were timing the jokes, they could chat to the audience, etc., and it was okay. Yes. But for me, you cannot beat live. I mean, there is something about going out on an evening, a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, or whenever you go, have a few drinks with your friends, go into the room, sit down, and think, right, make me laugh. This is going to be amazing, and it's of the moment. That's the magic thing. Anything can happen. And that's the most wonderful thing. And I just love it. And I'm so pleased it's all back live, because the poor old industry was decimated during the pandemic. It really was. And it's wonderful to see a lot of them touring again, and the comedy clubs open and all the rest of it. So thank you for all you do, because you're doing a wonderful thing.
Likewise, Rich. You're the lifeblood of these things.
You're very kind.
We're nothing,
Just before we go, and I've so much enjoyed talking to you. I could talk to you all night.
Likewise, yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? Have you got any podcasts? What's your social media or anything like that?
I have. I post clips and stuff on my Instagram quite regularly. I'm at Popes Benedict. But yeah, I've literally just today. Well, when this goes out, it won't be today, but in the reality of this chat today, I've put out a YouTube special called Mr. Big Stuff, which is like a kind of like best bits / my favorite sort of things. And I filmed at the Star of Kings pub in King's Cross, and that's free to watch, and it's like 45 minutes, and I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's really nice. So if you want to watch that, you should watch that.
Good man, I will do.
For anyone else, I think that's about it, really. I'm not really touring or anything at the moment, so
keep doing what you do. I will bump into you very soon in a comedy club, no doubt. And you're a very, very, very funny comedian. We were so impressed, and all the very best to you. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much, Rich. Cheers.
See you soon. All the best.
So long.